Buying a property has always been one of the biggest financial decisions Singaporeans make. When it comes to buying a home, one common question that people will ask, especially when they're upgrading to a private property, is this: should you go for freehold or leasehold? And in today's episode of our Dollars and Cents podcast, we'll take a deeper look into this debate. How much more are people really willing to pay for a freehold property? And if freehold is really better, why then do some leasehold condo actually outperform freehold in some cases? And joining me in today's episode is Dinesh from our editorial team. Dinesh, as usual, welcome to the show.
Yes, I wrote articles about this, so again, happy to discuss the topic.
Right, and this article that we're talking about is something you wrote, I think, a couple of weeks ago, which is freehold versus leasehold. How much more does a freehold property still deserve to be sold at? In this article, Dinesh, you actually mentioned that it depends on the location that you're looking at. Can you explain why that is the case?
I kind of found that, some of the estates where it feels like certain locations are in freehold enclaves, so most or many of the properties there are freehold. If there's a property that is 99-year leasehold, then maybe they'll be less desired. Personally, I don't know what's the reason, but, I can just consider, what I think are logical, right? So I think a lot of the people in that place value the freehold homes. That's why they're living in those areas.
Where are those locations that you're specifically referring to?
The one in the article that I wrote about was the Bukit Timah area.
So people in Bukit Timah would prefer freehold. Is that the point?
No, the point is Bukit Timah is generally a freehold enclave.
All right.
So hence, that's why. And there are others, the other one I looked at is, the whole East Coast kind of area.
Right.
There are a lot of more freehold properties. And, if there is a 99-year leasehold, then maybe that difference is larger than another estate, which maybe a lot of the properties or developments there are 99 years, and then it is one of the few freehold properties in those estates.
So what you're saying is that in estates where the majority of private property are freehold, the difference between a freehold property valuation versus a leasehold can be quite significant.
Yeah, that's what I found from the Bukit Timah. Okay. It's just a few similar developments, similar years, similar types of development.
The discount is more significant compared to if you focus on an estate where the majority of private property are leasehold, then the premium that a freehold command is not as much.
Yeah.
A lot of property agents, they would say that if you buy a new leasehold condo today, it can generate you a higher return if you sell it, say, in the next 5 to 10 years, compared to if you buy an older freehold property in the same area. Do you agree with this?
To me personally, I always think, if you are buying it based on, a future return, then it has to come in commensurate with the risk that you're taking on. So I always look at it as higher risk, higher return.
Fair enough.
At some level, we have to accept that, if you're buying a leasehold development, maybe in this instance, pre-TOP, so that means you're buying it in advance.
Brand new,
right? Then it might have more potential because you're actually losing out in terms of, what you could have with that freehold. You could be losing out rental. You could be like paying interest while you're not even living there. You could be paying a rent elsewhere, So there are opportunity costs that you're losing out at the same time. And maybe that's one reason why you're seeing a higher return as well, because that property is not actually ready to live in.
I think the other reason I feel is that when you talk about a older property, whether it's freehold or leasehold, chances are that, in my opinion at least, the valuation of that property is represented by fundamentals in terms of its demand. So over the years, people are interested in the property, the seller wants to sell, this is the price they agreed on, and the market has kind of already been set. Whereas I think for newer property, sometimes the demand and supply equation is not really fixed yet. So the developer is selling at a price. People don't really know yet what the future price will be. A bit like IPO actually. Do you think there's some logic there?
I think there is some logic to it. Let's say you have a choice, right? And you're choosing the older property. You might be doing it from another perspective. Like you want to live there for a long period of time. Versus if you are buying a property to profit, then you're not really looking to live in a property for a long time, right? Not that 20, 30 years. You're not actually looking for that. You're actually looking to flip the property within 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Surely less than 10 years, I think, for that profit, right? So there are many things that come with that speculative nature in going about buying properties then.
This article from Stackholm was about someone buying a freehold property and then they regret buying a freehold property. The development that the buyer could choose between is in Tanah Merah Simei, Casa Merah, right at Tanah Merah MRT, and Changi Court. The buyer actually bought Changi Court. The reason they cited was that Changi Court was a bit cheaper. It was freehold and they thought that was going to be the better purchase. Surprisingly, when they checked the price today, they realized that if they had bought Casa Merah instead, the capital appreciation of the property would have been about the same. So not more, not less, but about the same.
Yep.
But the buyer's perspective is that he feels that he has a worse deal because Casa Merah was a newer condo. And in a location he actually thinks is better because it's right at Tanah Merah MRT.
Correct.
So he felt like he stayed in Changi Court, hoping that he will get a better upside. But in the end, the capital appreciation over the last 10 years is about the same. So he wished he had bought at Casa Merah because then at least he will enjoy better and newer amenities as well as a better location.
I think it's easy to look back in hindsight and say, hey, I should have done this. But I think if he were to look at the reasons, some reasons I would imagine would be he want to live there for a long time, not just 10 years. Maybe 10 years later, the profits are the same. Then he had regret, hey, I could have enjoyed that better location amenities. Then now I'm suffering, or maybe I'm putting up with these lower grade amenities. I think maybe that's his regret. But if his premise was buying the property because he want to live there for the next 30 years, he should have considered the amenities to start off with, right? And not just regret after 10 years. So I think the reason that you buy is equally important. If you're going in buying with 30 years in mind, then let's look at it 30 years time, right? Because in 30 years, Casa Merah will be a 60 plus year old property.
Yeah,
then in 40 years, it'll be a 50 plus year old property. So the length that you want to stay there is also important. And the next thing I think is that, if you are a person who gets remorseful over these profits, there are profits to be found almost everywhere sometimes. If you look hard enough, the agents will tell you this is a good place to buy. You can do it every 5-10 years. It's whether you want to, you are in it to shift house every 5-10 years or not. If you are, then maybe you can pay more attention to these properties that might appreciate in value, right? So he was obviously not looking for the property price appreciation. If not, he would have looked at other speculative properties. Whereas he went in your definition, the safe property, the market has been found already, and this is the property he went for.
You make a very interesting point, which is that, Casa Merah is not exactly an old condo yet, at least. And we will only know in 20-30 years down the road when, Casa Merah or 99-year lease developments are actually, reaching age 60-year lease and stuff like that. But I just want to add in another point, which is that when I look at some of the older condos in Singapore, I think of places like Loyang Valley, in the east, Mandarin Gardens, Pine Grove. And you're right in the sense that the lease is starting to come down, right? The lease on some of these places are like 50, 60 years left. But they seems to still be trading at a higher level because of the fact that there's en bloc potential. So even though the lease is lower, but people are now pricing in the fact that some of these developments have solid en bloc potential. They all sit on very big site areas. They are all underdeveloped from a maximum block ratio perspective. So even though it's leasehold, the lease is shorter now, the value is still there because people are speculating it will en bloc. What are your thoughts on buying these properties?
For me, it's risky, right? Unless you truly look at it as a home you want to live in,
right?
You never know when the en bloc is going to come, right? There are some properties that have been waiting for en bloc for like almost 10-20 years already. It just hasn't come yet. Will it come? Maybe. I'm not saying it will never come, but the potential is there obviously because of all the reasons that you cited. Large, good location, plot ratio not really maximized. So the reason that people are really discussing en bloc means there are chances for it to happen.
Yeah, I'm just wondering also, like moving forward, right? We all know that government land sales, they're going to be 99-year lease as well. So actually, if you think about it, that means freehold will become more and more exclusive over time as the majority of condos and homes in Singapore are 99-year lease. Do you think it's a good thing for freehold properties because they're now part of a more exclusive group of freehold properties?
I think there's some truth to Singaporeans are accustomed to the fact that many properties are 99-year lease.
Or HDB flats.
Most of us buy
lease.
our first property with HDB and it is a 99-year lease that we have on the property. Right. So to me, as freehold developments become more rare, right, it should technically become more valuable, right? The more scarce something is, the more valuable it should be. The only one thing that I am a little bit wary of, right, is that some of these freehold developments are pretty old and it was built maybe a long time ago, whereas the maintenance is going to be a very big problem now because it was built so long ago. Now they need a whole overhaul of their lifts. The sinking fund, there's not enough money to actually pay for it. All the homeowners have to, chip in. So there's a risk to buying older developments. It's not just exclusive to freehold.
Leasehold might give you the same
Leasehold
problem.
might give you the same one, and with even less upside because then you're not even sitting on a freehold land, right? You have to upgrade the property because you have no choice. If the lift is not working, the person on 30th floor, there's no way he's going to get up there, right? On a daily basis.
Which is why they go for en bloc lah.
Yeah. right? But if you're sitting on a 99-year property, then it becomes even less enticing, right? If you're sitting on an old freehold property, then okay, at least there's some economic sense to doing it.
No, but I feel like that's the thing also which actually works, in my opinion, works in favor of leasehold, because the owners in these old leasehold condos know that their lease are counting down.
Yeah.
They will be more accepting of an en bloc in a way, right? Because they know that as time goes by, the lease is counting down, the leaves are not working. The option is either you top up the sinking fund and everyone come up with tens of thousands of dollars to upgrade a leaf for this old building, or you just en bloc and then, you know, get whatever the developer pays you, and then it's not your problem. Hopefully you get a windfall.
You definitely paint a picture where it makes sense, but imagine the scenario, and this is a purely fictional, don't anyone say I'm scaremongering. Let's say the scenario that we use where Mandarin Garden waiting for a long period of time already, and their lifts are, you know, totally not in functional
I heard
use
that
anymore.
is a very great place to stay.
Is,
We have
it is.
friends who
I'm just-
stay there, they love Mandarin Garden.
I'm
by
just
the
saying
way.
this fictional scenario, right? And because it is a 99-year lease and we don't know when the en bloc is going to come, will they take a lower price? Then because then they have to decide whether to overhaul their whole lift
Lower
system,
price as in
or-
from an en bloc lower price perspective. Right?
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, I know some people who live in Mandarin Gardens, they love the development. So they might be looking at it from a home perspective
Yes.
also, not just an investment perspective.
No, this
right?
is just a fictional scenario.
Yeah.
We could reiterate that again in case someone just tunes in at the wrong time.
I just want to add in one more element here, which I don't know whether that is the reason why leasehold condos are sometimes more favored today. I know that from the perspective of a landlord, a leasehold condo will be better, because if you're going to rent out the home, whether it's new or brand new or a resale leasehold condo, you know, you're not going to think that you want to pay a premium, because the person who rent it from you will not care that it's a freehold property. So all they care is it in a good location? Are the amenities nice? And can I enjoy it? Right? And they're not going to care that, oh, I'm going to pay a higher rent to you because it's freehold. Right? So in that sense, from a landlord perspective, you would prefer, all things equal, a leasehold condo, because upfront capital is lesser, but you can immediately, you know, get the rental income.
I think that's definitely one element of it, right? Because they are looking at it from a how much rent they're going to get. And the reality is that if you are a tenant, you're not going to think, hey, you know, my landlord paid a bit higher because this is a freehold. You're going to look at the location, the amenities, you know, the floor that you're living on. You know, all these things are what improve the rental rates. I would say one thing that the guy who owns the leasehold condominium, I would put him in the bracket. He's looking actually to also not just benefit from the rent, but he's also looking to benefit from the appreciation. So he wants to flip it within that same before 10 years, you know, the 5-ish year, he wants to sell it and realize that the capital gains as well. So he's not just looking for the rent, but he's looking for the capital gains as well, right? Whereas for the guy who lives in a freehold, he may see his value potentially holding up better in the longer term, you know, in the very longer term, right? Whether that person is in it to realize that value in 40 years, you know, he has to ask himself whether he wants to be the owner of that property in 40 years.
Actually, you're right, because I think when you look at freehold property, I think good class bungalow, right? People who buy, I mean, I don't own a good class bungalow, so I'm speaking from what I think people who buy good class bungalow things. I think when
armchair observers here.
Armchair observer for sure. But when you think of someone a lot richer than us buying a good class bungalow, quite often people think of it as also a legacy asset, right? An asset, when you buy a GCB, it's freehold, it's your GCB, you may want to bring it or pass it down to the next generation, right? So that's why the freehold status is very important.
I mean, I can't disagree, right? From the times that I have walked around in not just GCB enclaves, but, you know, just landed property or large landed property enclaves, you know, I see some of them have their own name sometimes as a placard on the walls here. So I think there's definitely the element of, you know, there's that legacy. And beyond that, maybe the good class bungalows, I tend to be multi-generational, you know, surely 2-3 generations will live in there, right? Whereas someone who live in a condo, they're not having that mindset at all. They expect their children to have their own homes for sure.
So there is this thing called the Bala Curve, which I think you have heard of. What it says is that when a leasehold condo is at its 60-year mark, about 80% of the freehold equivalent. So then my question is, like, let's say the price difference is between 10 to 20%. Will it be better to buy, say, for example, the freehold?
If you're looking to stay long term, then it should definitely be the freehold. If especially you say 10-20%, it's not a huge difference to anyone, especially if they're not stretching themselves. So don't stretch yourself when you buy a property in the first place. Then if you see a property that it falls within the 10-20% and you get that freehold upgrade and you want to also live there,
all things being equal,
for that 30 plus years, it checks a lot of boxes. So I can see why a logical person would just say yes.
In Singapore, we are a young country and we typically don't see any property, or at least not that I can recall of, which is going to be like 60, 70, 80 years old that is still in Singapore. Right?
I think not yet, right? Like you mentioned, why a lot of the older properties were on block was also because of some factors like our rapid development meant that we can upgrade the plot ratio and do some of these things as condo developments become like optimized in terms of everything, car park, plot ratio, how they space their apartments. Where will the upside come from, right?
Correct. That's one thought I have, that leasehold condos still make sense because buildings typically don't go 80, 90 years.
Yeah, I think based on track record, we have to say, sure, but I just don't know in the next 60 years whether it will always remain that way. I'm not sure.
So the next 60 years may not be the same as the last 60 years. I think that's the main thing, right?
Yeah.
Because you see more and more condos, they're fully developed already.
Especially those smaller boutique developments that are also fully optimized.
Yeah. In the landed space, you can actually see that significant deviation already between freehold landed and leasehold landed. That's not so apparent in condos, but in landed property, freehold landers and leasehold landers are really, diverging in terms of the valuation.
I think it's not a surprise to me or anyone, maybe, because, my first point I mentioned is that why are some leasehold properties less valuable in freehold enclaves? Right? It's because people in that location just prefer freehold.
Yeah.
And if I extend this point to this, right, people who buy landed properties maybe tend to prefer freehold, right? So you're kind of playing in a freehold market, whereas you own a leasehold property. So that's my reasoning, and I think that is what is playing out here, and the price also shows that to some extent. But I also think like smaller points come into play, right? What if you see an old development or old landed house that you want to just do A&A work? You're not going to spend that 500,000, 1 million to redevelop a leasehold landed which has 30, 40 years of its lease left.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Because the economic value is that, it's very unlikely you will be able to, or at least the chances of you extracting the value back will be much lower. Yeah. Right? If you were to, A&A is one example, but let's just talk about a complete rebuild, right? Yeah. About $300-400 per square feet. So assuming it's 4,000 square feet, that will cost you about $1.6 million, right? And
you're not going to rebuild it.
Yeah, for a leasehold property, because it's going to be very hard for you to extract the value even if you sell it in the future, because anyone who looks at the property, it looks nice, but it's a leasehold landed, right? Compared to if you have a freehold property and you spend that 1.6 million rebuilding it, suddenly that asset looks enticing for the next buyer. But what about cluster housing? I feel like cluster housing seems to be given a pass, because it's also landed.
Okay.
Right?
I think we've spoken about this, right? My one thought here is that, cluster housing acts more like a condominium development than a single landed house.
Okay.
In the sense that, if you're going to unblock this project, you're going to unblock the whole cluster.
Right. So it's like Mandarin Gardens, right?
Yeah.
You can potentially en bloc the whole thing.
Yeah. Maybe the plot ratios are not well utilized. Whereas if you take one single, I'm sure there are like a whole rows of them, but if you take one single landed house,
leasehold landed,
you might need to speak to 50 property owners and have different arrangements with them to even begin thinking about whether you want to take that whole
all of
estate.
them have to agree, right?
Yeah.
Because if one person don't agree, then you have an issue in terms of how are you going to redevelop the whole land with a terrace house right in between. Whereas in a collective sale for a condo or cluster housing, as long as the majority of people, I'm not sure what's the percentage, is it 80?
80, yeah. 80% comes to mind again.
80% of people agree, the en bloc happens, right? And the whole development is sold to the developer. Whereas in a pure landed play where everyone owns their own unit, one person disagree and we have problems already unless the developer can be creative.
You see like some of those viral photos from overseas countries, right? Like beautiful development and
I think in Singapore we have versions of that also, but I will not say which project because I can't remember the name.
I can Google it.
Basically what you're saying is that with leasehold there's no potential of really basically en blocking.
Yeah, and I think the owners also know that, right? I remember reading a story maybe about 2 years ago, I can't remember again exactly when it was, 2 years ago. And the owner, and this is near that Casa Merah property that we were talking about earlier, is near there, right? In the Tanah Merah estate, having a leasehold property. And it's hard to sell after you see the leases nearing the end.
Yeah, especially if you are compared to in an area where there's a lot of freehold, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the point you're trying to make. If there's a lot of freehold option in that area and you are the only leasehold landed or you are one of the few leasehold landed,
Yeah.
that becomes more of a problem compared to if the whole area was just kind of like more leasehold landed. And thank you once again for joining us in this episode on freehold versus leasehold, which is the better purchase. And as usual, we don't have all the answers, so if you have your thoughts on this topic, feel free to share with us on the comment section. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And as usual, if you like this topic, remember to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, or Spotify, whether you are watching or listening to this. We'll see you again.